There are moments in history when heaven opens its veil not to reveal comfort, but to warn. Moments when the invisible becomes visible, and the heartbeat of eternity echoes through time. One such moment came quietly on an ordinary autumn morning in 1884, within the holy walls of the Vatican. The air was crisp, touched by the faint smell of burning wax and incense. The faithful had gathered in the private chapel for the daily Mass of Pope Leo XIII, a man of intellect, wisdom, and prayer. He was known for his gentle soul. But that day, those who stood near him would see a face that would never be forgotten. And among them was a humble nun, Sister Lucia Benedetta, a woman whose life would be forever changed by what she witnessed that day. Sister Lucia was not born into privilege. She came from the small village of Benevento, nestled among the olive trees of southern Italy. Her father had been a shoemaker, her mother a quiet woman of prayer. From her earliest memories, Lucia had loved the church bells. She would run barefoot through the dusty streets just to hear them echo through the hills. Her childhood was marked by hardship. A fever took her mother when she was 10, and her father followed soon after. Alone, she was taken in by the Sisters of the Sacred Heart. It was there that she first learned the joy of silent prayer, the kind that filled her heart with warmth, even when the world outside was cold. At 19, she took her vows. Her eyes shone with innocence and resolve as she whispered, "Lord, let me serve you in the smallest things." Years later, that simple vow would lead her to the greatest mystery she could ever imagine, to serve in the Vatican itself. By 1880, Sister Lucia had been sent to assist in the papal household. Her duties were simple: preparing vestments, cleaning sacred vessels, and ensuring the chapel was ready for Mass. She was quiet, modest, and observant. She never sought attention, yet her diligence caught the notice of the Pope's attendants. In those marble corridors, she felt both awe and smallness. The vastness of the Vatican seemed to swallow her at first. The echoes of footsteps, the scent of ancient incense, the silent portraits of popes gazing down from the walls. But she grew to love its stillness, its peace, its rhythm of prayer and work. Every morning before dawn, she would light the candles and whisper softly, "For the glory of God and for the heart of the Church." Little did she know that one morning, that quiet chapel would become the battlefield between heaven and hell. It was the 13th of October, 1884. Mass had just ended. The small congregation of clergy, sisters, and attendants remained in reverent silence. Pope Leo XIII, then 74 years old, knelt before the altar. He had finished offering the sacrifice, his head bowed, lips moving silently in thanksgiving. Sister Lucia was at the back, folding purificators, her eyes occasionally glancing toward the Holy Father. Then it happened. The atmosphere changed. The air grew heavy, as if the very walls of the chapel were listening. Lucia noticed the Pope's shoulders stiffen. His gaze lifted not toward the crucifix, but beyond it, as though he saw something none of them could. His face turned pale, his hands trembled. For a moment, he seemed frozen between heaven and earth. Seconds passed, long, agonizing seconds, before he rose suddenly and walked briskly toward his private study. No one dared follow, except Sister Lucia, whose heart urged her forward. She stopped at the door and listened. Through the heavy wood, she heard the faint sound of weeping, not sorrowful, but stunned. as though someone had glimpsed eternity itself. Moments later, the bell rang. The Holy Father's secretary entered the study. When he emerged, his face was ghostly white. In his hands, he held a single sheet of paper. "His Holiness commands this to be printed immediately," he said. On that page was written the prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel. It was many years before Sister Lucia would learn what Pope Leo XIII had seen, but whispers spread quietly between priests, among confessors. And finally, to her, the Pope had seen a terrible vision. He had seen the demons of hell gathering over the eternal city. He heard the voice of Satan, proud and defiant, speaking to God, "Give me more power and time, and I will destroy your church." And the Lord's voice had answered, not in anger, but in solemn majesty, "You have the time you ask for. Do what you will." The Pope saw legions of spirits descend like smoke upon the Vatican, spirits of pride, disbelief, and corruption. He saw confusion enter the hearts of believers, the faith of nations grow cold. And then, amidst the darkness, a radiant light pierced the sky. Saint Michael the Archangel, with a sword of fire, descended to defend the church. It was this vision that moved Leo XIII to write one of the most powerful prayers ever given to humanity, a plea to heaven's defender. "Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil." That same year, Lucia began to notice changes. The peace of the Vatican seemed disturbed. Priests whispered of divisions. Politicians mocked the church, and newspapers spoke boldly against faith. Everywhere she looked, she felt a strange restlessness, as though invisible hands were stirring hearts toward pride and rebellion. One evening, as she cleaned the altar, she felt a shadow move behind her. She turned quickly, nothing, but she felt it, a coldness, a presence that did not belong in that sacred space. Her rosary trembled in her hand. She dropped to her knees and whispered the Saint Michael Prayer. The air seemed to break open. A faint light shimmered before her eyes, and in that light she sensed peace returning. Afterward, she wrote in her journal, "The demons have entered the air around us, but the angels have not departed. When I call upon Saint Michael, I feel the weight of fear lifted, as though heaven itself breathes through the prayer." But the battle was not only around her, it soon came within. There were days when Sister Lucia felt unseen forces whispering to her, voices of doubt and despair. "You are wasting your life," they hissed. "You could have married. You could have lived free." At first, she ignored them. But one night, as she lay awake, the voices grew stronger. She felt suffocated by loneliness. She rose from her bed and went to the chapel. It was dark and silent, except for the faint flame of the tabernacle lamp. She knelt before it and whispered, "Jesus, I am weak." And in the stillness, she heard not with her ears, but with her soul, a voice. "Then be weak in my arms, for the humble are my soldiers." From that night, the temptation faded. Lucia understood what Pope Leo XIII had seen, that the devil's greatest victory was not destruction, but discouragement. The enemy wanted souls to despair, to doubt, to forget that God still reigned. One winter evening, as Lucia was arranging candles in the chapel, she saw a flicker of light that did not come from flame. It grew brighter until the air itself shimmered. Then she saw him. Saint Michael, tall and radiant, his eyes like burning stars. His voice was neither thunderous nor soft, but firm and loving. "Fear not, servant of Christ. The church will suffer, but she will not fall. For every prayer whispered, another chain is broken. For every mass offered, another soul is saved." Tears ran down her cheeks. She asked, "Holy Michael, will the demons ever cease their war?" He smiled. "Not until the last soul has chosen light or darkness. But remember, one prayer from a faithful heart weakens the army of hell." When the vision faded, the chapel returned to silence. Lucia fell prostrate before the altar, overwhelmed by the love that had spoken to her. From that night onward, she prayed not only for protection, but for courage, for every priest, every nun, every believer who would face this hidden war. As the years passed, Lucia grew older. The church faced new storms, philosophies that denied God, revolutions that sought to erase faith from nations. She would hear news of priests arrested, churches burned, families torn apart. The vision of Pope Leo XIII was unfolding before her eyes, yet she never despaired. She saw the church as a wounded soldier still marching forward under heaven's shield. And she reminded others that the same power that frightened the Pope was also the reason he gave hope, because where the enemy grows bold, God reveals his greater strength. One day, a young novice came to her in tears. "Mother Lucia," she said, "I am afraid. Evil feels everywhere. How can we fight something we cannot see?" Lucia smiled and placed her rosary in the girl's hand. "With this," she said, "and with faith that never sleeps, do you not see? Each Hail Mary is a stone thrown at the darkness. Each street Michael prayer is a blade raised for heaven." In her final years, Sister Lucia was frail but radiant. Her eyes, though dim, still sparkled when she spoke of God. On her last night, as she lay surrounded by her sisters, she whispered prayers for the church, the Pope, and the world. Suddenly, her face lit with wonder. "She's seeing something," one of the sisters whispered. Lucia's lips moved. "They are here," she said softly. "The angels, street Michael, and beyond him, light upon light." Her eyes filled with tears of joy. Then, with her last breath, she whispered, "The battle is not lost. It is being won in prayer." She died with her rosary entwined in her hands. At dawn, as the sisters prayed beside her, a golden light filtered through the chapel window, brighter than any they had seen before. After her death, the sisters found a small folded note beneath her pillow. In her delicate handwriting, it read, "I have seen shadows in the house of God, but I have also seen the dawn rising behind them. Every prayer is a sword, every mass a fortress, every believer a soldier unseen. The enemy is cunning, but heaven is steadfast. Pray and do not lose heart, for every whisper of faith is louder than 1,000 cries of evil." Those words spread quietly, copied and shared among priests, missionaries, and the faithful. They became a hidden fire, reminding all that holiness, not fear, was the Church's true defense. More than a century has passed since that morning in 1884. But the battle Pope Leo XIII saw has not ended. It has only changed its mask. Today, the demons speak, not through revolutions and wars alone, but through distractions, pride, and indifference. They no longer storm churches. They whisper in hearts. And still, the Archangel stands guard. Every time the Street Michael prayer is whispered in a church, a home, or a lonely hospital bed, a sword is lifted in that invisible war. And every time a believer chooses faith over fear, light over despair, the victory of that autumn morning continues. The world may forget Pope Leo XIII's vision, but heaven has not. The words he wrote remain eternal. Street Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. Those words echo still through every soul who dares to believe that the unseen world is real, that grace is stronger than darkness, and that every whisper of prayer is a weapon of love. So, when you kneel to pray, remember Sister Lucia, the quiet nun who saw beyond fear. Remember Pope Leo XIII, the shepherd who faced the vision of hell and responded with faith. And remember that every time you pray those words, you join the same battle that began in heaven, a battle that will end only when love has conquered all. It was not a legend. It was a revelation, a warning, a promise, and a call. The demons still roam, but so do the angels. And as long as there are souls who pray, heaven still reigns. The years that followed that vision were not easy for Sister Lucia. The world around her seemed to be shifting like sand beneath her feet. In the Vatican, rumors circulated about the growing power of secret societies, of philosophies that denied God, of new enlightened movements that mocked the Church as outdated and blind. The same voices that once whispered respect for holiness now shouted for its silence. But in the convent, Sister Lucia had found a weapon stronger than fear prayer. Each night, she would kneel in the dim chapel, the flickering candlelight casting shadows that danced like spirits along the marble walls. Her rosary beads moved slowly between her fingers as she prayed for the Holy Father, for the priests under temptation, and for the world that seemed to be forgetting its Creator. Yet sometimes, when the wind howled through the long stone corridors, she remembered the way the Pope's face had looked that day, pale, shaken, yet filled with divine authority, and her heart trembled. She wondered, what if those demons the Pope saw had already begun their work? What if they had entered hearts, not walls? Months later, during adoration, Sister Lucia heard within her soul a quiet voice, not one that spoke with words, but one that pressed deeply into her conscience. The battle is not outside you, my child. It begins in your own heart. She realized then that Pope Leo's vision was not merely about Rome or the Vatican. It was about every human soul. Each one was a battlefield, a place where light and darkness met. And so she began a new mission within the cloister. Every morning after Mass, when the sisters recited the prayer to Street Michael, Sister Lucia closed her eyes and imagined the invisible war raging just beyond sight. She pictured the Archangel's blazing sword, slicing through clouds of despair, driving back temptations that sought to break the faithful. One day, while tending to the convent's garden, she noticed the smallest flower, a white lily growing between the stones. The other sisters had walked past it, but Lucia knelt beside it and whispered, "You bloom where no one sees you, and yet you glorify God." That evening, during her reflection, she wrote in her journal, "The soul that resists despair, even when unseen, is like that lily. It grows between the stones of darkness and gives beauty to heaven." From that moment, her diary became her hidden testimony, a record of faith, of small victories, of grace, and of the unseen battles that every believer must fight. In 1890, When the Holy Father composed the solemn Exorcism prayer for the entire Church, the Vatican quietly sent copies to convents and monasteries across Europe. Sister Lucia was chosen to read it aloud during community prayer. Her voice trembled as she spoke the ancient words commanding the spirits of pride and corruption to flee. That night, she could not sleep. The world seemed heavy with invisible unrest. In her heart, she sensed what Leo XIII had seen, not with eyes, but with faith. The Church was under siege. And yet, amid that heaviness, there was light. One evening, while praying before the Blessed Sacrament, Lucia saw something, not a vision in the way the Pope had, but a moment of illumination that pierced her spirit. The host on the altar seemed to glow more brightly than usual, and she felt as though all the battles, all the fears, all the storms raging through the centuries were gathered and silenced in that single presence. "He is still here," she whispered. "The Lord is still with us." She realized then the meaning of Leo XIII's vision, not that demons had entered the Vatican to conquer, but that heaven had revealed its warriors so that the faithful might rise. Years passed. The world entered a new century. Many priests forgot the St. Michael prayer. Others found it unnecessary, calling it a relic of fear. But in her heart, Sister Lucia continued. She prayed it daily for priests, for the sick, for the dying, and for the world. She was an old woman when the First Great War broke out in Europe. She saw young men, once full of laughter, sent to die in muddy trenches. She heard confessions of soldiers trembling with guilt and fear. And yet she never lost faith. "This is the war Pope Leo foresaw," she told the younger sisters. "Not only of nations, but of souls. But remember, St. Michael still fights for us." The sisters began to spread her devotion quietly. They copied her small handwritten notes, her meditations, her reflections on the invisible battle. Soon, these little pages reached other convents, priests, and even bishops. One of her writings read, "Do not wait for great miracles. The miracle is faith that endures when the world no longer believes. Every soul that prays, every heart that resists sin, every whisper of street. Michael, defend us in battle. These are victories. Heaven counts." Near the end of her life, Sister Lucia fell gravely ill. Her hands trembled, and her eyes could no longer read her own worn rosary book. The convent's chapel had grown colder that winter, and many thought she would not see the spring. But she smiled when the sisters came to pray beside her bed. "I have lived long enough to see what Pope Leo saw," she said softly. "Not with my eyes, but in my time. Darkness grows cleverer, yes. It disguises itself as freedom, as progress, as knowledge. But the light remains." Her final days were filled with quiet peace. She asked the sisters to recite the St. Michael prayer beside her each evening. And as her breathing grew faint, her lips still moved silently with the words, "St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle." On the morning of her passing, one of the younger nuns, Sister Anna, reported hearing what sounded like distant music, faint and beautiful, though no choir sang. Others said they felt a sudden warmth fill the cold room. No one spoke for several moments. Then Mother Superior whispered, "A soul has gone home with the angels." Years later, when her writings were gathered and read aloud in the convent, the sisters wept. They discovered that every page of her journal echoed the same truth that Pope Leo XIII had once seen in his terrible vision, that the war between light and darkness is real, and it is fought not in the clouds, but within the heart. One of her last entries read, "I do not fear the demons Leo XIII saw. I fear only the silence of those who no longer pray. The silence gives them room to speak, but one prayer, whispered in faith, breaks the gates of hell. That passage spread across monasteries and seminaries, translated and shared, awakening devotion once forgotten. Many priests began again to say the Street Michael prayer after Mass. In time, even ordinary families began to pray it in their homes, as Sister Lucia had hoped. And so, the legacy of that day, in 1884, the day Pope Leo XIII saw demons invade the Vatican, did not end with fear, but with faith. It passed through the trembling hands of a pope, through the humble devotion of a nun, and into the hearts of countless believers who still whisper the same words today. Because every age has its darkness. Every heart faces its own trial. But wherever that prayer is spoken, whether by a priest in a grand cathedral or a mother by her child's bed, Street Michael still descends, his sword blazing, defending the children of light. And if one listens closely, one can almost hear, across the centuries, the same voice that spoke to Sister Lucia's heart. The battle is not outside you. It begins in your heart. But take courage, for the victory belongs to heaven.